So I think we can get started. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to this question and answer session with the current student, which is held as a part of the Experience Grad York today. My name is Yuko Sorano, and I'm manager of external scholarships and graduate awards at the Faculty of Graduate Studies at York University. And I'll be moderating the session today. And we are today joined by three wonderful graduate students, and I'll be introducing them in a moment. I would like to begin this session with the land acknowledgement. So for those of you who are not familiar, so land acknowledgement is a way for us to recognize the traditional territory of the indigenous peoples of Canada. And although we're not gathering in a traditional in-person way, it is still as important to begin the session with acknowledgement. We acknowledge that many indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many indigenous nations. The area known as the Toronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon, One Spoon Belt Covenant, an agreement to peacefully share and care for the Great Lakes region. Okay, so today, we are really delighted to have Dean Thomas Lobo from the Faculty of Graduate Studies, who really joined us to say hello to everyone. So Tom, would you like to start?
Yeah, thank you. And I do want to say hello to everyone who's joined the webinar and to thank you for participating. And as I've already done to our students, I really want to thank our student moderators here today, because this is a great opportunity for you, prospective students, to ask questions and to get sort of the real answers from a student perspective. I'm going to disappear. So this is really a students talking to students session where, feel free to hear the good, the bad, the ugly, and the wonderful about graduate studies at York. So just a welcome and a thank you, and enjoy.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is the last session of the Experience Grad York, and I hope many of you have had a chance to attend some of the other sessions that are held earlier today, to learn a little bit about grad studies at York. But this is really a unique session, because this is the way really you can hear the first-hand experiences and perspectives of the current students. All the sessions earlier today held were offered by staff members. So this is really a great opportunity for you in the audience to ask some of the questions that you want to hear from the current students. Okay, so without further ado, let me introduce the student panelists today. So we have three students. So the first, Alma Khan, Master of Science student in Mechanical Engineering. And also we have Benjamin Johnson, who is a doctoral student in Political Science. And we also have Biftu Youssef, a doctoral student in Geography. So as you can see, these students are in many different disciplinary areas. And so our hope is for the panel to be able to sort of offer diverse perspectives, whether, from their program of disciplinary experience, and also at the study level as well. So we have one master's student and two doctoral students. So let me also quickly describe the format here. So we would first ask them to introduce themselves. And after that, so we have a list of questions that we have already received from, I guess, those of you in the audience who submitted the questions before the event. So we were going to be asking the panelists to respond to some of these questions. But we also encourage you to put in any additional questions in questions and answer, and we'll take up those questions as we go along. Depending on how many questions we receive, we may not be able to cover all of the questions, but we hope to cover a range of themes that the prospective students are interested in learning from the current students. Okay, so let's start with student introduction. So can I ask each of you to introduce yourself, perhaps briefly describe also your research project or the area of study? Okay, so Biftu, can I ask you to start?
All right, well, thank you for the warm introduction, Yuko. As was said, my name is Biftu Youssef, and I am a third year PhD student. I'm in geography, so that's my program, and I'm in the Faculty of Urban and Environmental Change, which is pretty new at York. And my area of research is really in forced migration, but my specific project really looks at the refugee protection and specifically how refugees themselves facilitate their own protection. So in the context of forced migration. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Ben, next, introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ben. I'm a fifth-year PhD student in the Department of Politics at York. So my research areas are focused on international relations theory, Canadian politics, and security studies. My dissertation looks at Arctic geopolitics, and I'm looking at the development of security technologies that are being developed for surveillance and intelligence in the Canadian Arctic, and then linking that to broader trends in the international security environment.
Yep, and thank you, Ben. And I think you're year 5 and you're planning to complete your degree fairly soon, right? So we have, again, like in the range of sort of perspective and then also sort of the stage in their studies as well. So next, Arma. So you are in the master's program, I believe in your first year. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yep, I'm Arma. Thank you for introducing me, Yuko. Yeah, I'm in my first year of master's. I just started in summer, in September, actually, to begin with. And my project is mainly, I'm in the Department of Mechanical Engineering. So my project is mainly based in fluid dynamics and fluid mechanics. To be more specific with my research project, it's based on following and tracking particles. I want to study the transport phenomenon of droplets and particles that are immersed in the air. So mostly concentrated in the context of COVID-19 and how these droplets are sort of spreading within the air and becoming airborne, and how these effects can be minimized based off of different HVAC systems. And yeah, that's about it.
Okay, well, sounds really exciting. Thank you. Okay, so so the first question really is around why you decided to pursue grad school in the first place. And some of you may have continued straight from undergrad. Some of you may have done something else after your undergrad or between master's and doctoral. So if you can sort of describe what prompted you to decide to pursue graduate education in the first place. For students who are at the doctoral level, if you can mention sort of why you decide to come back to do the master's and also to continue on to the doctoral, and then also why York? Why did you come to York? So I guess we would ask all of you. Ben, would you like to start?
Sure. So the question as to why I decided to do grad studies is pretty simple. I'm one of the few people that took quite a bit of time off my undergrad. I had thought about doing grad work probably around my 4th year or 5th year of undergrad. But I had spent quite a bit of time in undergrad and I was tired, I was burnt out. Especially because I had switched programs from the natural sciences to political science, and money and all that stuff was kind of a concern. So I took a lot of time off, and that ended up being several years. And then I became very, very bored with work. I was just very, very unsatisfied with my kind of career path at the time, or lack thereof, I suppose, and decided to kind of give school a shot again. And before I took just some classes before I actually enrolled in a program formally, just to see if I actually really wanted to, get back to studying all day and night and writing papers and stuff. And I was working at the time, so it was quite a bit of a commitment for me. And then it ended up going very well, and I decided to just give the PhD a shot. And ended up again being a very good decision for me, anyways. In terms of York, I could go on to this for a while, but the basic reasons were the research I was doing at the time. York was very well known for the research area that I was in, which was political economy and labor studies. And my master supervisor actually had his PhD from York, so he kind of talked me into it. And a more basic reason was out of all the schools that I had applied to and gotten into, York offered me the most money right off the bat. And the last reason was Toronto was a place that I was kind of setting my sights on. I'm from Ottawa, and I had a lot of friends here already, so it was just a very easy transition. So, yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. Biftu?
All right, so I guess so the first question was why to decide to pursue grad studies, and for me, I would say it was like pretty much a natural transition from my undergrad. I am one of those people that just continued on, so I pretty much have been going at it like I think it's my 11th year now. So I did 2 master's degrees as well, like simultaneously over at my the university that I transferred from. Um, Before I even transitioned from undergrad to grad school, though, I would say that grad school wasn't even on my radar. It wasn't something that I had thought about at all, but I'd established pretty good relationships with some of the faculty members in the program that I was in, and was working on several research projects, and just realized that I developed like a knack for research. So I felt really compelled by that. And so I just ended up in grad school for those reasons. Um, York was honestly a pretty easy decision for me. I would say if I had to pick like 3 things that really stood out for me, as Benjamin said, the big thing was in terms of migration research, being out in the East and specifically at York, there's a really good established community that's doing that kind of work. One of the things that really compelled me was the York offers quite a few organized research units. That's I think what they're called. So if you haven't had a chance to look at them, please do. So for me, it was the Center for Refugee Studies. I was really drawn to that. And what I found was, although all throughout kind of my interests, especially my upper division in my undergrad, and as I moved through my master's, I realized that I didn't really have a community. I was really looking for a community of people who were interested in the same kind of work, and really just to be around more like-minded people where I could have, there was a lot of, reading that I was doing, a lot of theoretical things that I was thinking through, but didn't really have like the actual bodies, at least not in close proximity, to have to talk through some of the things that I was thinking about. And so I felt that that was a real gap in my master. So when looking at PhD programs, that was one of the things that one of the gaps that I really wanted to fill was, where can I find my people essentially? And so landing at York and just looking at the diversity of things that people, even in the migration sector, forced migration and refugee studies, the different topics. So it was quite diverse in that respect. And then also that York is just a very diverse campus altogether, be it from the student body to also the faculty. Those were the other things, again, that I think for me, where I was situated previously, was kind of missing. And yeah, those were the things that really drew me to York. Thanks.
Okay, great, thank you. And then now Arma, so would you respond to that question?
So for the first question about why I joined grad school, well, first of all, in the middle of the pandemic, I think this was like the obvious solution because jobs were sort of on the low. Trying to find one was very difficult, and like I found a project that was easy to do from home. So that was like one obvious answer. But other than that, since in my undergrad, I used to do research during the summers when there were no courses. And I really liked doing research because especially with engineering, there's 2 aspects of it. There's the industrial aspect where you sort of work with your hands, and then there's the research aspect where you sort of work with your hands, but you also sort of go in depth and learn more about the theory and sort of sit there and sort of learn more in depth, rather than I feel like an industry where you just sort of you touch base on something and then you sort of move on to the next, where you don't get to delve into research, which something is something I would be comfortable going into and sort of learning more in depth about something. And so that was one reason. And then also I started doing it's called Allura research. It's like an undergrad research grant that's offered for in engineering. So I joined that for the professor, and I really liked her work. I liked what she was doing with her research. She does a lot of community-based research on like energy and sort of water cleansing, and she also got this new project for COVID. So I was really sort of devoted and committed to working with her. So that's how I went on to working with her with the master's. And so in terms of York, the answer again goes back to I like my professor and I like my project a lot. But also in general, I also did my undergraduate at York. So I think in terms of York, I'd say that it's in the mechanical engineering department and the engineering department, it's a very nice community. And we're a new department in terms of engineering, but like because we're new, we're also flexible to new ideas and we're always building up from where we are. And it's sort of not really traditional or based in like sort of we have to follow the same rules. We're always making new rules and trying to figure out why something works and why something doesn't. And so I'm really excited to be part of this new and growing community. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And it is true at York University, of course, we have, really a range of disciplines, and some are more established and have been known for some time. And in like areas like engineering, the Lason School is fairly new, as even the building itself is new. And then there are, a lot of growing areas of, even just faculty research, the students who do research with the faculty. So it's really great to know that you sort of, started at undergrad and then went on to continue. Okay, so now we have a question from the audience, Anessa. And sorry, I didn't introduce Anessa, but Anessa is sort of joining from the background. She's a manager of communications who helped to put together this event. So Anessa, would you be able to say the question?
Of course, yeah. So if the question is, can you elaborate on this simultaneous masters, please?
Also, that'll be a question for Biftu, I believe.
Yes.
Yes, and I would just note though, it's not something that, as far as I know, that students at York will do. Biftu, I remember you did your master's at another university, but can you respond to that question?
Yeah, so just to clarify that, that's exactly right. I didn't do my master's at York. I did it at another university. And basically all that it was there was two programs that I wanted to do, and I essentially just decided to do both of them at the same time. So that was a simultaneous master's. It ended up being one project in the end, but I did have to complete the coursework and do all of the requirements for the programs independently. But when it came down to the actual project, it was a very interdisciplinary approach. So yeah, without saying much more, that's how I approached it.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, and then Anissa, do you have other questions?
Currently, no.
Okay. Okay, so we'll move on to then the question that we have. Okay, so did your undergrad degree program prepare you for grad school, and especially the program that you're in? Biftu, would you be able to answer the question? I think you mentioned that you did sort of school throughout, straight from undergrad to grad.
I will say for the program that I'm in, yes, in a lot of ways, yes. I feel like though the transition from I think the thing that I noticed most significantly from my master's to my PhD was just like the time commitment, the amount of reading that was required. And I don't know if that is like specific to the program that I'm in, or if that's just kind of a general experience across PhD programs. But there was just the intensity of just like what was like the demand and the intensity of like reading. Like there was just a lot like for the first year and getting through that coursework was intense. There's no other way to say it. And so I'm glad to have done the master's and to obviously have been, to have gone through some of that beforehand. To have some of that preparation from my master's definitely was helpful. What I will say though, having in that first year of doing coursework and undergoing that really intense, where you're reading, I just felt like that's all I did everywhere I was like, whether it was, transiting or, just you name it. I feel like there isn't a place or a space that I didn't do my readings. It really prepared me for my candidacy. So in doing like the comps process, so for those programs that do have comps as a part of the requirement, I feel that it did really prepare me and equip me to get through that process in an easier way. That process in itself was also quite cumbersome, but and especially having undergone that during the pandemic. So I'm glad to have had that experience, that kind of runway leading up to the comps process.
Right, and you touched on the really interesting point. That's the actually next question. But so yeah, graduate studies, and it probably would depend on the discipline that you're in. That in BIFT, I think your area you do a lot of reading, and some other programs you might do a lot of different kinds of things like lab work and stuff. But with the panelists, would you be able to answer this question, which is, what is the overall time commitment to research that you spend each week? And it might be different, from if you're doing the courses, if you're doing the research. But if you can sort of describe how your sort of day or week is like being a graduate student. And I would just mention that because there's some question that came about the coursework as opposed to research. So all of the three students here today are in the research-based program. So I believe there's some combination of research and coursework, depending on the year of study. Some master's programs are course-based. So really you only complete a certain number of courses and graduate without doing the research component. So that might not, so if you're thinking about one of those programs, then the experience of doing research might be a little bit different. But in any case, this question is specifically about the time commitment to research each week. Ben, would you be able to respond to that?
Sure. This is a tough question to answer because it varies wildly depending on what stage you're at. For example, right now I have a very light load in terms of my research because my supervisor is reviewing my re-edited thesis draft. So I'm waiting for her. So in terms of actual research, I'm really not doing anything right now. I'm just waiting. I might read a paper or two if I find them that I think they might be helpful. But prior to this, I mean, there was stages where it is a full-time job, literally in different capacities. You're working between 4 to 8 hours of solid research work, ranging from reading and writing to just like tracking. If you're doing field research, then it's like it could be it's a job and a half. So it's hard to kind of average it out. But in my program, or maybe the humanities more broadly, they always kind of tell you, like, if you're doing on average 4 hours of solid hard work a day, not including emails or any of that kind of stuff, then you're kind of on track. And I'd say my experience is that's probably right, because for me anyways, I can only think about something hard for only so long until my brain is dead, and that's usually probably really 3 to 5 hours, somewhere in there, per day, before I'm done.
Right, great, thank you. And Arma, so what is your experience been so far?
Well, obviously it's much different than the undergraduate course load. Everyone knows the engineering undergraduate course load is awful. But so in terms of that, it's better because I'm more independent, so I can sort of keep my time flexible depending on that. Sometimes I work from 9 to 5 with my research, and then I do my coursework on the weekends. So I do have a lot of coursework in this semester and my previous semester. But then next year, because the master's is 2 terms, so the next year I won't really have any coursework. But other than that, I try to time myself and try to get at least like 5 or 6 hours of research done. I mean, I try to get 8 hours, but obviously, as Ben said, you can't concentrate for that long. But then, yeah, I also try to read papers in between. And then sometimes I try to work at night, depending on sometimes deadlines come up and we have to submit abstracts or papers. In that case, you'll have to work longer. But other than that, usually the coursework and plus the TA work and the research work, it balances out, and it's not as bad as one would think when someone thinks about grad studies. It's a lot of work, always in the office sort of a thing. But if you can time yourself properly and time manage properly, I think you can get sort of like a full-time job, basically sort of a 9 to 5, and then maybe sometimes on weekends, and that should you'll be successful in terms of that.
So that's good to know. So those of you who are thinking but might be a bit worried about the amount of work that might be required, it's obviously the students do work very, very hard, but So 4 or 5 hours of thinking and, doing the research to sort of full-time, kind of work kind of a schedule. I mean, really students have their own approaches to what might work as well, but it's really good to know that, I guess you are managing in your own way what is required. So, but okay, on the sort of more fun or exciting side, I would like to hear from you on sort of your favorite part or most, your most exciting or favorite part of, the grad academic life experience thus far. So it could be again about research, but it could be not related to your research, but anything related to your sort of graduate student life. Let's start with Biff too, if you're able to share some of your insight. No, I think you're still on mute.
So can you just repeat the question? There was a bit of
Yeah,
distraction going on.
no, that's
behind
okay.
me.
Yeah, no worries. So what is
Yeah.
the most what has been the most favorite part of your grad academic life, so experience thus far?
Grad academic, and so does it have to? Okay, grad academic experience. Oh gosh. Oh man.
I hope there's something exciting.
Like, is this a trick question? But I mean,
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be academic, specifically,
yeah,
just really being as a student. Yeah.
right, as a student. I guess it's connecting with people, and especially connecting with people, as I mentioned before, like the thing that appealed to me about York was finding other people that had similar interests. I think that really appealed to me. But I think just in general, whether it's across disciplines and just like learning from one another, that kind of peer to peer connection, I think has been pretty tremendous. And I know that grad school as a whole can be a pretty isolating experience, right? As well. So to have those outlets where you back to the research centers, right, where you can connect with people, engage, participate in talks, whether just even as an audience member, and those happen quite frequently. So the networks that you establish, I think, for me, anyways, that's one thing that's really stood out. That's true of my experience at York over the last 2 years. So I think that's what stands out for me. And around the kind of academic piece, my program specifically, the geography program, is quite small. So I also found, so there was only 7 of us that started the cohort in the year that I entered, and we were all in one office together. So we ended up forming quite a close bond. So we did end up doing a lot of social things as well outside. We tried to kind of get together at least once a week, whether it was on campus or off site. And our program regularly held something called coffee hours every week as well. So that gave us an opportunity to just to socialize, whether it was to talk about things that were going on for us within our program, how we were progressing, or a lot of times we just say, let's not talk about any of that and just talk about like life outside of academia. So yeah, I think that's what stands out for me. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Arma or Ben, would you like to add to that? Like if you have anything, really exciting or your favorite part that you would like to share? If not, then we can move on to the next question as well. Ben, I guess you have something to say?
Really quickly, I would just echo that intellectual community is like really, I mean, it's not important for everybody. For me, I found out kind of after the fact that it was really, 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 really important for me. And then there's the other thing for me that I think the best part is that I get to wake up and do whatever I want. Like if I don't want to get up at 6 in the morning to go to a job I don't really want to go to, I don't have to, which is, we don't usually talk about grad students being privileged, and there's a lot of downsides. That is definitely not a privilege, but this is like one of them, is that you get to literally do what you want in a lot of cases. It's not the entire degree, but for me right now, it is like literally I get to do whatever I want every day, which is, you can't buy that. So.
Right. And then, I mean, after all, I mean, everyone who really come to do grad studies, have this particular topic or area of study that they want to pursue. And even though, have to do, the required coursework and whatnot, you can still frame, a lot of the project and your thesis dissertation topic in a way that you really want, that's according to your passion, right? The way that you want to pursue. So it is true. That's a really great thing about being a grad student, as opposed to while you're working, in a different sector where you really have to do what you have to do the whole time. Okay, so there are other a few questions that came around, and they're sort of a similar theme, and I think that's probably interest to a lot of the prospective students, and also probably even the current students. That's around sort of balancing work, studies, and work or other aspects of your life, or to be able to manage well. So sort of around like mental health and keeping your mental health well while you try to pursue and then complete your studies. So let's start with this question of sort of how do you deal with the feeling of being behind and overwhelmed, which probably is a common theme at least at some point in your grad life. But how do you sort of what's your sort of coping strategy of when you're feeling either behind or overwhelmed? Arma, would you be able to share that sort of perspective?
Yes, I've been overwhelmed and behind quite a bit, undergrad and grad. But I'll say I think most of the time when you're overwhelmed and sort of you feel like you're missing deadlines and whatnot, I think the main important thing is to sort of take a step back and sort of see what you're doing and where you are, and sort of just take maybe 30 minutes off just to plan and sort of see what you need to do and what you don't need to do. What is a priority basically, and sort of plan for your day or plan for your week, and that way you can take everything step by step. I feel like when you're getting overwhelmed, everything sort of keeps bouncing at you, and you can't figure out what you want to do first, and like everything is sort of, and that's when you start having these well, for me especially, I have like these perfectionist tendencies where I'll try to want to do everything perfectly, but then I'll also try to procrastinate because I don't want to do anything messily. And that sort of thing where it's like if you started like plan everything and take a step and do one thing at a time, I think that really helps in a sense. But yeah, grad studies is definitely overwhelming, but if you know how to plan and time manage properly, I think it's doable.
Great. That's good to hear. Okay, so Biftu, can I ask you that same question? So what your coping or strategy or wellness strategies that worked for you, has worked for you?
Yeah, I really like what Arma said too. That tends to work for me, planning daily. And also just like checking in with myself. Like there's some days that that I can feel really energetic and like I've got a lot of good kind of productive hours in me, and some days not. So trying to plan when planning for the day, like breaking everything into smaller chunks based on how I feel. So doing, just like self check-in. The other wellness for me is like taking care of my well-being is super significant. And what that looks like for me is making sure that I'm like exercising, like have like a dedicated like exercise schedule, and that could look like anything from like walking to just like, as long as I'm just my body gets moving, like I've just got to be moving. I do try to like implement that throughout my day as well, whether it's like changing kind of where I'm working, maybe I'm at my desk, or I'll be standing at the counter in my kitchen, or just not working in the same space. I like to be facing the windows, like so just trying to kind of sometimes even just like visually, try to implement some things in that sense so that I'm just feeling good about the work that I'm doing in the spaces that I'm in, particularly under these COVID conditions. Um, and just trying to like eat well. Like for me, it's just like it's the combination of just like eating well as best as I can and just getting my body moving really helps to keep me grounded, and also just to for me to like it allows me to refocus when I do feel like I'm getting a bit overwhelmed. And also just to remember, like we have supervisors, right? So there are always people that we can talk to and reach out to, administrators and programs. Like deadlines are deadlines too. That's one thing that I really had to, or I've come to like learn. I would say particularly with my PhD and kind of working under these conditions of the pandemic, that I mean, they're deadlines and that's just all that they are. They can always be negotiated. So if you do feel, I found that like I got to a point where, if I do feel like, okay, no, like this isn't working, I've got a lot of things that I'm balancing work, I've got a family, there's all these other things, right, that are also demanding of my time, that it's okay to just step back and say, okay, let me actually do a check of what's going on here. Maybe that this can be delayed, have that conversation with the appropriate people. And I think in the end, obviously every program has a set of expectations. There are annual check-ins that you're required to do. So the concern I think in that respect is that you're not falling too far behind, but I think there is flexibility in it too, that you can kind of self negotiate, and also just reach out to the appropriate parties to see what can be done to help you manage that schedule. So you're not alone. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at too. So part of it is yourself, but just reach out to the appropriate people when you can as well. They're there to help.
Right. No, it's really, really true. Thank you for that. Ben, any strategies or coping skills that have worked for you?
So this is something I was really, really poor at when I was younger, especially during undergrad. Like undergrad was a real struggle in especially the first couple of years. And I don't have any specific strategies of why I got better at it, but I did. I think taking some time off undergrad helped me a lot, just like literally getting older and kind of more experienced, and probably more mature at the same time. In terms of like PhD, I would say, I mean, the exercise element is so important. You know, even like you said, just like going for a walk. I make sure I exercise at least like I'll do an exercise like like an hour to 2 hours at least 5 to 6 days a week, and I force myself to even when I really really don't want to, just because I've never not felt better after a workout, and it makes me like measurably more productive at my work afterwards because I'm content of like being at my desk, and reading and maybe doing stuff that isn't necessarily that interesting sometimes, even though like to kind of backtrack on what I said about doing what you want, there are elements you're going to have to do that you don't want to do, whether it's coursework or anything, or just filling out like, you know, ethics forms and stuff like that. And then again, yeah, like I mean, yeah, it's weird. Grad school gets easier, in my opinion, than undergrad. Undergrad like is way harder because you're doing, you know, a full course load is 4 to 6 classes. You have assignments, you have all this stuff. Whereas grad school's hard. Don't get me wrong, but for me, the amount of things that were taking my attention were much less. So it became easier to focus and to kind of measure, well, what's important. And then with respect to the things like deadlines and stuff, like your professors are like more like your peers. So they tend to be a bit more, you know, if you're going to be a day or later two on an assignment, they tend to, in my experience anyways, much more accommodating because they care about your mental health as well. So yeah, I would say, you know, and to remember literally everybody is going through the same thing you are. Like imposter syndrome is like a universal condition for grad school. So just get used to that.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Ben. And I think, you know, just from my perspective, supporting graduate students as well, it is very true. You know, of course, graduate students are, you know, generally very high achieving, you know, students and, you know, have very, you know, strong passion to pursue the studies. And, you know, that could also add a bit of stress and, you know, like sort of overwhelming feelings as well. So just from the university perspective as well, so mental health and well-being have been, you know, an increasing focus for us to put resources into to support graduate students as well. So for example, at York, at the Faculty of Graduate Studies, we've had a wellness counselor, a wellness manager who manages sort of the wellness program specifically for graduate students. The university always had, you know, the counseling accessibility services office and the counselors there to support students, you know, support students in general, support students who need accommodation. But the Grad now has a specific person, and we are planning to, you know, expand that services as well. And then, you know, so you know, the manager can do the counseling, some other sort of certificate program in wellness. So it's an area that the university recognizes as an issue for a lot of students, if not all, at some point in their studies. But that is also, you know, in a way good, meaning that, you know, there are students who can share the experiences. You know, we are trying to do more support as well. So just so those of you who are thinking and might be worried about that, it's a very common experience, but for most people, it's an experience that, you know, with right coping strategies that they are able to manage well. On this sort of issue around the wellness and well-being, and this is only if you are able to share any input either from your personal experiences or experiences of someone that you know about around accommodation for mental health. It could be some other issues as well. So do you know any sort of, do you have any knowledge about sort of what the process is like for someone who needs academic accommodations, either for mental health or other issues? Does anyone have any sort of insight to add?
I don't have any personal experience with this, but I know just from teaching, that, you know, there's a specific process involved about going to get an accommodation, and that it's I'm not even quite sure what it is, honestly, but the university treats it very seriously. So it's like, it's because of the times where much more, I think, or the university and kind of society more widely is much more accommodating to those issues than maybe previously, even a few years ago. So
Right. So you're saying that you had it in the context of you're teaching as a teaching assistant.
yeah, as both a teaching assistant and I've been a course instructor too.
Right.
So
Okay.
I've had a lot of students,
Right.
bring me accommodation letters and even informally have come to speak to me about like they're experiencing mental health issues. Who do they go see? And then I just point them towards the specific department, and then they actually get proper expertise.
Right. Yeah. And it's good to know, like that, from the sort of a teaching perspective. So the university does have an accommodation sort of policy and processes, and it's always good if as a student, if you feel you might need accommodation, to access that resources early in your studies, even before the course starts, because then that way that your professor is able to have that information. That the university determines what kind of accommodation might be necessary for that student. So if you are thinking that you might need one, even if it turns out that you might really not need, it is always good to try to access that resources as well. Does anyone else have anything to add on this topic? Okay, so a little bit still, I mean, I don't want to be talking too much on the mental health, but it is again, like, academic side is also, of course, very important primary focus, but, taking care of yourself as a student is also, really an important issue. So on this one, and especially given the pandemic, and that has really changed, the student experience for a lot of students. I would like to hear from you on sort of your experience, like especially in the context of COVID. I mean, in the case of Alma, for example, you sort of started during the pandemic, so it might be a little bit different, but you have been students before as well, obviously. So like, how has that impacted your sort of experience, and especially around burnout or stress or the feeling of isolation? Um, Anyone would like to start this respond to this question? Arma, would you able to share your experience? And you mentioned that your research is on COVID, and I don't know if that's sort of by chance or you had planned to do something similar anyways. But the COVID is really, it seems like it's for your on your general life experience as well as your academic sort of experience. It has been, I'm assuming, sort of a significant issue, right? Would you be able to sort of talk about from your student experience piece?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I started my research with COVID when COVID completely started. So that was when the grants were being proposed, and my professor proposed the grant for that. So yeah, and when I get burnout, I'm sort of, there's also the thing about, oh, I should be working on COVID because people are getting infected and they need help. But at the same time, I need to calm down and sort of take a step back and just do self-care before I keep working too hard where I burn out. So there's that dilemma there. But other than that, also it's like it's been very hard to sort of get into this work momentum and sort of have these cues to go and work, because like we're always in the same environment, in the same house. As Victor said, it's like there isn't really enough options for us to sort of get out and sort of maybe do homework with friends or like discuss a subject with our peers and whatnot. So there's that boundary there. So like I've definitely experienced parts where it's like I get stuck with sort of a subject or a question, and then I keep going in loops. But then I think what's helped with that is sort of taking a step back and trying to maybe take a break, take some self-care, and then go back into it, and then read some other resources or ask my professor. She's always there to help. So that sort of helps. But yeah, obviously it's not the same as when we were on campus, especially with my undergrad, where we all used to hang around together, the whole group of friends, and then study and do our homework together. So there's definitely that feedback thing that I'm missing now in grad school, being in a pandemic sort of environment. But at the same time, I think sort of still being able to adapt to the situation and finding new ways to deal with it is a good way for me to sort of keep pushing. And obviously, I know my professor knows that I'm not as effective as I was if I would have been in school, but we're all still going. We're all still fighting for it. And yeah, definitely self-care and sort of connecting with friends and family. All of that helps in a way. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. And so, Bifty, I would like to hear some of your perspective, but also if you had experience either taking online courses or teaching online courses since the COVID, sort of shut down the campuses, how that has been as well, if you have had that experience.
Yeah, all my coursework was all done, so I hadn't taken, and I don't think I'll be taking any online courses since the pandemic has started. I did TA a course last semester, but I was more of like a grader marker, so I listened to lectures, and interestingly enough, I found that students were actually quite engaged. I think I attribute part of that success to the instructor who, I don't know where he found his enthusiasm every evening from 7 to 9 p.m., but he kept the lectures quite lively, and there was always just so much student engagement. So hopefully there's a lot more of that kind of energy floating around in the different courses. And I was quite surprised by that because I myself had taken a lot of courses online, especially in my undergrad. And I know that it's just like not a medium that works for a lot of people, right? But we're resilient and we learn to adapt. And it's been, honestly, it's been a bit of a roller coaster. I think for me, the biggest thing is I used to choose to work from home a lot. It was just kind of my preference, in part because it cut out the commute and it just kind of allowed me more flexibility to do things and kind of manage my schedule. So I'm not just stuck in one space, kind of working for 7 or 8 hours, kind of treating it like a full-time job. I could work in chunks, do a 4-hour chunk, take a break, go exercise, come back, and do another 4-hour chunk or something. So it was just easier to implement that kind of schedule from home. And now I feel like I've been in this like forced, multi-purpose, that's become this multi-purpose space, not by choice. So a lot of ways, in a lot of times I've kind of just tried to resist or even resent that idea, but we adjust. Like I've adjusted, and I do the best that I can, and just under the understanding that we're all in this, right? We're all doing kind of the same thing. So just based on what Arma said too, like I don't think I'm as productive as I have been in the past, and I think that's true probably of a lot of people, but at the same time I've reached a lot of milestones, right? And so I just kind of take everything in strides, try to remain as positive as possible, and just remembering, I've remained healthy in this condition. So it's a fine balance between like getting kind of pulled and kind of to this like dark space, and then just being like, no, like it's bad, it's really bad, but at the same time, like we're going to overcome this. And I think just trying to have a lot of perspective in it as we're going through it. Yeah.
Yeah, great, thank you. And Amar, you mentioned about the research project that I think I believe you're working as a research assistant on for a faculty member who has a research grant. So that's sort of, in relation to that, a lot of students had questions about obviously money, the funding and the funds and scholarships and awards and other stuff to how to support financially their studies. So I would like to sort of ask a few questions around that area. So the first question really is what kind of sort of funding or scholarships are available in your experience? What kind of things that you are able to access so far to help support your studies? I probably will ask all of you. Ben, would you like to start? Sort of your experience of accessing funds, either offered or you applied for any sort of kinds of funding.
Sure. So prior to starting my PhD, I had literally not one, except for I had no money in terms of scholarship and stuff like my master's was completely, because I did it part-time, I paid it out of pocket. During my undergrad, I had an entry scholarship that I promptly lost because I did not maintain the A- average that I needed to keep it, because I spent my first year doing a lot of not studying. So I wasn't quite sure. I mean, the big ones are obviously SSHRC and NSERC, and they're very competitive. They're hard to get. I was lucky enough to get one, a SSHRC. And I've been actually lucky enough to get quite a few different fellowships and scholarships and research assistantships. So to make it a short, there's actually quite a bit of money out there. You just got to work to find it. It's not, there's no, unfortunately, even though there's kind of like centralized databases that provide you with there's tons of scholarships out there. they're not the greatest in terms of there's often a lot of just really small kind of inconsequential ones, but you'll often find that there's a lot of money specifically tailored to whatever your research focus becomes or will become. So, and then there's a lot of like big scholarships that like, my department in particular, everybody focuses on the SHIRK and Ontario
Ben,
Graduate
can you,
Scholarships.
sorry to interrupt. Can you
Yeah.
describe SHIRK or what it is, just for those of you who might not
Oh
be
yeah,
familiar with SHIRK?
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, so SHIRK is like the Social Science and Humanitarian Research Council of Canada. It's like the big federal department that does like all the funding for from everything from grad and undergrad students for awards and fellowships to actual like professors. So projects ranging in, the thousands of dollars to the millions of dollars. So like everybody, if you become, especially professors in the social sciences, humanities, use it. The natural science analog to that is NSERC, which is the natural
Yeah, it's natural
research.
sciences and engineering, I
Yeah,
think. Yeah, research. So maybe the AMORS, I guess, area, right?
Yeah, Natural Science and Engineering Research Council.
Yeah, so those are like the two big ones. Like, just to put in perspective, like a SHIRK doctoral scholarship is, I think, worth anywhere between $20,000 and $45,000 a year, depending on the type of scholarship it is. Anywhere between 2 to 4 years. I'm not sure if NSERC is comparable or not. But so yeah, like I've been lucky. Like I had to work my first couple of years of my PhD. I was doing part-time jobs. I was lucky I had some connections with friends here that owned bars in the city. So I was bartending my first few years here because you can make decent money working on weekends. It doesn't cut into your study time too much. But I also got internships which ended up leading to some research opportunities. So I got lucky in that sense, but you have to go out and find them and apply for them. And it's a lot of work that it's not easy. I will definitely say that, but you get much easier once you get one award, because it puts you up on a higher competitive level against other people. And it's not an ideal environment. I don't love it, the idea of having to compete for money with other students, but it is a reality.
Right, thank you. So yeah, you have SHIRK, and so SHIRK is one of the common scholarships that the graduate students apply to. And I should have sort of started off by saying that, so for, compared to undergraduate, so graduate students, especially graduate students who are in research-based programs, they're mostly funded, and also there's these opportunities to apply for additional funding. So so glad to know that Ben had a SHIRK scholarship, and then apply for some other funding opportunities as well. But as you said, it is true. It is a competitive, nature. So, for any awards or most awards, there's definitely a lot more applications than the number of awards available. But at the same time, there are also a lot of opportunities as well. So I think it's great that you mentioned that you just have to go find those opportunities. Bifty, what's your experience been so far? And and if you can mention any big ones, but also small ones, or the ones that that you had experience receiving as well.
Yeah, and the SHIRK was the big one I think that stands out for me. I was successful with the SHIRK both in my master's as well in my doctoral studies. And exactly, it's super competitive. I can't even, I would say that I've been pretty successful overall. There's a lot of money that's out there, but it's exactly what Benjamin said. Like, it's work. Like, in fact, I used to just tell myself it's like a part-time job, just like searching for it, making sure that you qualify, you meet all the requirements, getting the reference letters, making sure that you give enough. It goes back to like the whole organizational and time management of it. So like that's why I would treat it like a job, because you're requesting reference letters. You've got to give time for that as well, right? You got to ask you got to give your supervisors enough leadway, and then making sure that you meet the deadlines, that all of the paperwork gets submitted. And so if you can kind of get into the rhythm of doing it, and although unfortunately they're competitive, and it's not a fun process, but I think once you can get into the momentum of doing it, there's a lot of money out there, and sometimes it can be very specific to certain social locations, right, that we hold, or because of the research that we're invested in, or because of community work that we do. So they're not just academically driven. So it's not just merit based all the time. There could be, there's a lot of other types of awards out there that exist, or maybe because you hold membership in a particular organization or community. So definitely do take a look at the portals. There are internal scholarships and awards. There are external ones to the university, and I've dabbled with both. Like I've applied externally and been really successful. I've applied internally and been, really successful. I feel that since I started my PhD, I haven't done as much searching and applying, but that's probably because I find that I'm dedicating a lot more time to research-based work, right? So taking on a lot of RA-ships just to help build my own portfolio, so to speak, and trying to kind of shift gears more towards publications and recognizing that in itself has merit, right? So planning more for the future in different ways, and yeah, just trying to seek income in different ways. So I have looked at the internal awards at York. There's a ton of them, but again, it's time. So if you do have that time investment, I would definitely encourage you to do it. And once you, and even if it's, some of them require writing, whether it's what do they call them, some sort of like personal statement, you can always reuse them, right? So once you just kind of do it once, I always just kind of pull apart, and so you've got like a base there, or your supervisor writes you a support letter, they'll just reuse that one too and tweak it. So once you get going with it, I think stick with it and do it. I think there's a lot of money, and it's worth a shot in the end. Yeah.
Yeah, and good to know. So, and then so I work in the Faculty of Graduate Studies in the scholarship area. So, it is true that there are a lot of external and internal scholarships available. So, and we also had a session earlier today. I don't know if any of you were able to attend, but on funding and scholarship that really went into a bit more detail about the kinds of funding that the student typically apply to. So we would have that information available as well. But just generally, so yeah, a lot of students do apply to funding after they start their program. So the SHARC and sort of, we call it SHARC and CERC, that's the engineering and science. And in CIHR, it's a little bit smaller component, but it's on health research. So these federal scholarships cycle annually. So, if you come to York, then you learn about our sort of internal process. So once, I guess you start your studies and you sort of learn about the process of when to submit an application and how sort of the adjudication process goes, and when you find out about the results and so forth. So so that'll be something that we definitely will be sharing with all students, current students, once so they start the program. And actually the competition, the application cycle starts early in September. So it's a little bit hard, or it's quite hard, I think, for a lot of the students who are just starting their studies, because that's when, when the semester starts, that's when you're supposed to be also preparing an application for those major scholarships. Of course, there are other internal and external scholarships that happen at different times of the year. But I just wanted to mention that there is one thing that I think a lot of students will find it hard, and it's actually better if there is a bit of time dedicated to sort of think about it before they started. But it's also hard, right? Because you have to have sort of your research project. But usually, so the cycle runs in, I think it's in September, when students prepare a lot of the application materials submitted in October. That's for the doctoral students. And for masters, it's a little bit later. So it's early December, it's a deadline. So yeah, so these awards are sort of the main ones that I think we encourage a lot of students apply to. And also there are, other internal and sort of a smaller scholarship and grants that the students can apply to throughout their studies. Arma, so you're in engineering. So would you be able to sort of talk about your experience and, either with scholarships or the RA-ship that I think you mentioned as well? How did you sort of get it? Like, did you have to apply, or did you sort of receive it as being a student in the program?
So yeah, there's definitely a lot of different awards internally and externally. I received an internal award from York. It was the Donna Hayden Memorial Scholarship, so I had to apply for that. I sent in a statement of research and my personal statement, and then I had to send in a reference letter as well. So there's different applications and needs for different things. And then for the NSERC as well, you'll have to sort of submit or the Tri-Council Scholarship and sort of the Ontario Government Scholarship. they require sort of a whole process and application. It's very detailed, but you'll have to submit sort of your research plan, basically a proposal of your research. So in that case, you'll have to know about what you want to do your research on and sort of the metrics and what your objectives are, and you have to list those out in sort of just a one-page document. And then other than that, there's also other things you can consider. There's other scholarships that I think are sort of, I'm not sure about them, but I think there are some that you don't really need applications for. You just need to fill out the financial needs application, and you can get that. But yeah, I don't have any experience with that. And in terms of just funding, if you do TAing, if you're a full-time student, then you do get funding based on that. So that's like a salary as well. So any scholarships are basically just additional funding, as Yuko mentioned before. Yeah, that's all I know about scholarships for now.
No, great, thank you. And sort of, it's really interesting that I think those responses lead to the next set of questions that I was about to ask. So we'll move to the TA question. But actually, before that, I just also wanted to add, as you mentioned, their bursaries. So a lot of the scholarships are merit-based. So you actually do, present a research statement and sometimes reference letters, and the selection committee will review the applications and select winners. We also do have bursaries at the Faculty of Graduate Studies for students that are need-based. So it's not really about your academic merit, but it's more about your needs. So the application will look more like, whether you're paying rent, whether you have a dependent, whether you have any sort of disabilities and other sort of expense needs, and that compared to the funding that you receive or the awards that you might be holding, and you will calculate the need and do the allocation. So the bursaries are quite different from scholarships, tend to be smaller in value, but that's sort of the university's way to try to meet the needs of the students, not just through the competitive award basis, but through these need-based bursaries as well. And one thing I also wanted to mention, there's some small pockets of money for research expenses. So funds specifically to support either to travel to do field work, although not many students are doing the field work right now, or to sort of do any kind of research, so for equipment, supplies, and such that are specifically needed for the student research. So those are a bit different pockets of funding, and usually you have to meet the eligibility criteria, but they're less selective because they're really to cover the expenses the student incur as a graduate student. Okay, so let's move to the TA question. So we have a question coming about sort of the teaching experience. So if any of you have been doing TA or have done TA-ship, or I think Ben, you mentioned you did a course directorship or instructorship, what is sort of the overall time commitment to teaching each week? Ben, would you like to start?
Sure. On average, I mean, your hours are allotted out like in terms of a contract, in a very kind of formal sense. On average, I'd say it's probably 10 hours a week, maybe a bit more, a bit less. You get, like my first year TAing, I probably spent more hours than that for sure. And then you become very quickly good at it. You learned how to kind of allocate your time properly, how to, like the way I remember my first year, I spent way too much time responding to emails. I was tailoring each email very meticulously. And then I realized like, this is not a good use of my time. So, but in terms of like teaching and then grading and prepping for tutorials and stuff like that, probably between 6 to 8 to 10 hours, somewhere in that range.
Okay, thank you. Arma, do you TA currently?
I do, yeah. So, but it's not a lot of TA commitment. So it's usually like 30 hours per course. I do like 2 courses per semester. So it's usually just like 1 or 2 hours per week of TAing tutorials. And then usually I'll have like maybe once a month, I'll have like 5 or 6 hours of grading. And then at the end of the semester, it gets a little bulky where you have to grade exams and projects. But usually it's around 30 to 60 hours that they assign.
Right. And that also depends actually on the discipline. Because I think more social science and humanities kind of discipline, like Ben's and BIF2, I think it's course-based. So as Ben mentioned, it's said to be sort of expectation is about 10 hours per week during the courses. In engineering and some other science program, they have a smaller components of TAs. So I think so you have one of those smaller components. So it might be depending on what program and where you might be taking the TA-ship, but it's also good to know. So it's so there's a bit of a variety, but usually depending on the discipline and what kind of TAship that the program assigns you. Arma, so the next question is around sort of the class structure. So what is sort of the difference between the structured classes for undergrad as opposed to grad? So the courses that you're taking. You able to speak to that?
So undergrad, you'd have sort of 100 students per course. And in terms of like course teaching, professors are usually similar in terms of the course delivery. But then again, sort of the class sizes are very small for graduate courses. So professors have a lot of like one-on-one meetings and sort of are more invested in your project as compared to undergrad. And also for grad courses, another aspect is that they try to tie in your research project based on that. So we have a lot of projects within our courses, and they'll try to have a small component that's a research that's based like a research project that ties in with your own research project. So you can actually advance in your research while you're doing the course. And that's something that's not there for undergrads. But other than that, it's usually very similar. You have your assignments, you have your exams, that sort of a thing.
Right, thank you. Biftu, what's your experience like, the courses from undergrad to graduate? I mean, I assume you're already done with the coursework, but I guess in your first couple of years, you're taking the coursework at the doctoral level.
Yeah, I think pretty much exactly what Arma said. The class sizes are much smaller. So it was like the equivalent of like doing some upper division courses that I did in my undergrad, seminar style courses. So at most I was in a room with 8 people, right? So, and a lot of times too, it was peer led. Like a lot of the lectures would be peer led. So I felt that you got to learn a lot from your peers as well as the professors or the course instructors. A lot more intimate, longer sessions. You're going for 3 hours, and usually it's the full stretch. A lot of kind of intimate conversation, in-depth conversation about the material that you're reading. So there's like you don't get the opportunity to like to hide or to duck out. Like there's an expectation that you're going to have done the work, that you kind of are showing up, that you're prepared, and that you're ready to kind of engage, you're ready to lead and to really contribute. So I think the kind of the sense of responsibility changes quite significantly, and the expectations change in that respect as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it is probably true, although there might be some disciplinary differences. Usually, yes, the lecture style, sort of a large class experience, the mostly for undergraduate. I think it's a lot uncommon in the graduate. So usually smaller sort of seminar style. I think classes are typical in the grad. So that's great that you both kind of mentioned that. The next question is a little bit, it's quite different actually, but I think we had a similar questions coming in at different times in, of course, especially now, but, I guess in recent years. So this is for Biftu. So have you felt supported as a Black student at York? And sort of, you can mention sort of, and it could be anything sort of positive, not so positive, but any challenges that you might have seen or anything that university should be working on, like, just in general, if you can sort of put in your perspective on your experience as a Black student, if you are willing to.
This is a tough one.
Is it a tough one? Okay,
Yeah,
so you know what,
yeah,
I can give you time.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe I'll just I'll let that just allow me to ponder that, and then maybe we can come back. I wasn't expecting that that question. So the question is, have I felt supported as a Black student at York?
That's right.
Yeah. I got to sit with that for a minute. If we can move on
no
to
worries.
question,
Yeah,
then I'll come
and
back
and then I think it's only if you're really comfortable answering. So
Yeah.
there are some of these questions come from my experience, sort of meeting different students, being a sort of a panel in different occasions, that I think especially currently in the context of Black Lives Matters, and so February is a Black History Month. So at the university level, of course, there's a lot of different kind of conversations happening around what as an institution we should be doing, or should be doing more to be inclusive, to be able to support, and to be able to eliminate sort of the systemic barriers that the university has had historically. So I think questions are coming sort of around that, and a lot of students who are thinking of pursuing graduate education, may have a bit of hesitation because of the concerns around that issue, so I've had similar questions coming before. So we can come back to this later if you feel there's something you can add. But again, if you are if you feel comfortable, I will just mention that experience as a Black student, of course, it's an individual based, right? So it could be very different from a student to student, and also York University is known to have diversity. I think somebody mentioned that not just Black students, but of person of color. So I think the term BIPOC has been sort of becoming more common for the Black, Indigenous, and people of color, person of color, sort of what their experience has been at the university in general, but also at York University. So on that topic, and as I mentioned that in February, so this is Black History Month, and for example, at the Faculty of Graduate Studies, we are organizing a panel to discuss sort of the why the Black History Month matters, what does that mean for the university, what we can do in this regard. So we're planning a panel towards the end of the month that's hosted by the faculty Dean Thomas Lobel that you just saw at the beginning. So I think there are different sort of efforts happening, initiatives happening at different levels, but sort of on a personal student level, it would be great to hear sort of what your experiences has been. So Biftu, we can come back to that if you would like to add. Would you like to add something right now?
Yeah, because I'm trying to think of this in a way that I think the first thing that came to mind is around an initiative, a student-driven initiative, right? A Black Student Council that was put together by students in the new faculty that I'm in. So I feel like that's been a space where, where myself or in the ways that I identify have been finding support in that respect. I'll also say that I've experienced a lot of microaggressions. And without, describing particular incidences, and this is at York, trickling down from I guess, just from people that hold position, just in very surprising ways, right? People that are holding positions and saying things, and I don't think that these are things too that are like intentionally meant to, harm people that identify in the ways that I do. So a lot of things that just have kind of some experiences that I've had. I shouldn't say like a lot, but there has been a couple of encounters that have really caught me off guard. And especially because, as I said earlier, coming to a campus where I was drawn to because of the diverse student body, the diverse faculty, which I know is also not true of every program, right, or every faculty. Some are a lot more diverse than others, but I think on the whole, it does fairly well, right? Like of across the campuses that I was in, the universities that I was looking at for my PhD program, I thought this is looking pretty good, right? But yeah, there's definitely been some really some concerning encounters that just kind of I think that have reminded me, and probably more so than I've ever experienced, if I'm honest, more so than I've ever experienced in previous institutions of that difference, right? Of being Black and kind of being not a minority, but minoritized, right? So in quite deliberate and systematic ways. So I'll say that I've experienced that, but at the same time, there are spaces that whether it's student-led spaces that have been created or different programs. We've got the Harriet Tubman Center as well that I'm affiliated, with and have participated in kind of talks. And we've got lots of experts and scholars that do work on these issues of equity. So there's been comfort in that as well, to know that there are these spaces that are routinely being advocated for, whether it's by students or other faculty members that share similar lived experiences, and really trying to kind of break down some of those barriers. I think I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, thank you. Arma, too, if I can ask you, and again, if you feel comfortable answering, as as a person of color student and female student in science as well, how do you feel either supported or not supported in your studies, in your program, or the university in general? To be able to speak a little bit on that.
To be honest, I haven't had quite the experience as Biftu, or like it's more of sort of in engineering, especially sort of it's not really sort of looked down upon in a sense. In that sense, more professors are usually, or not necessarily professors, but like administrative people are usually more like, oh, you're a female, so I want to advocate about you more. I want to bring awareness to more females and sort of have this sort of there's usually like now it's sort of moved on to this 50-50 sort of goals for Lassonde where they want to have 50-50 between males and females. So they really want to encourage females and sort of sometimes that sort of is kind of it feels like tokenism in a way where it's like I'm giving more special attention than the men in the same field. But other than that, it hasn't quite been discriminatory in a negative way. So yeah, I haven't had a negative experience to say.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I think it's something that, of course, everyone experiences a bit differently too. And, from, again, my perspective at the university, sort of supporting students, something that, I'm quite sort of, keen on finding out what are the ways that, we can do better to support students and all students, but especially students who have been, historically not privileged to be in the university. So, I just sort of wanted to, we had this question from the audience. I wanted to ask. So thank you for sharing your experience on these. I wanted to mention before we move to the next set of questions. So the university has sort of a series of initiatives to really address and promote more inclusion. So we have, for example, a new postdoc fellowship. So the postdoctoral fellowship or postdoc position is for students who completed the doctoral degree, usually before they start sort of professorship role, if that's their plan. So the postdoc fellowship university has announced that are really focusing on Black and Indigenous scholars. So Indigenous students, also another group that we really wanted to welcome and include and support as well. So this fellowship is a new program for Black and Indigenous scholars at York, and the university is hoping to have 4 scholars annually who self-identify as Black and or Indigenous in the transition from completing a PhD to becoming a professor. So it's something that the university is working on. Of course, there are other things that we should be working on as well. So again, I think it's sort of a process. And as Alma mentioned too, that sometimes, of course, being a female student in a sort of mostly male-dominated or historically male-dominated discipline, could work in, different ways too, right? Sometimes you're sort of more supported because university wants to support, but at the same time, there may be still other barriers that, depending on your experience, the students might experience as well. So thank you again for sharing your perspective. Ben, the next question is to Ben. So can you speak about the adult mature student experience? So you mentioned that you worked for several years before you came back to do masters, and you mentioned that you were working still when you were doing your masters. So can you sort of give us a glimpse of into your work-life balance, and what would be some of the shock factors when you started your PhD? I assume you studied a PhD on a full-time basis.
Yeah, so I started my PhD on a full-time basis, so it's maybe a little bit hard to speak to that. Well, actually, that's not true. I basically it's only the last year and a half, 2 years that I have solely been able to focus on my research and PhD studies. So, like I said before, my first 2 years I was working. Like at one point, I was doing full-time PhD. I had a full-time job during the summer after my first year through an internship through York University, doing on a research project, and I was working weekends. So to be honest, there was no balance at that time. It was just work. It's not to say I wasn't enjoying myself. It was, the experience overall was very good, but like a lot of things did, I suppose, suffer in terms of like, quality time with friends and stuff like that. And I was in a position where I could do that. Like I don't have kids or anything. So it's definitely not, there's different challenges associated with it. But I don't know. I mean, I guess you kind of also learn to prioritize what is important, I suppose. Like I've definitely, to put in comparison, have worked way harder in my life in terms of just like physical exhaustion, mental exhaustion and everything. So I'm not sure if that answers that question at all, but that's just kind of my experience.
Right, right. Yeah, no, thank you. No, definitely. I mean, it is a difficult question too. And of course, again, like each, student would have their have their strategy. But it is true that, some students work and study full time. I mean, some students might be studying full time and work full time, or they might be, working, or they might not be working like in terms of being employed, but have other family responsibilities as well. So it's always a challenge, I think, for any graduate student. So thank you for that. Now I am being reminded that it's almost, we have about 7 minutes before the end of the session. So I would like to ask, I guess each of you towards the end. No, sorry, before that, actually, I wanted to ask one student. So I think I'm going to ask maybe BF2. The question is, so what would you say is your biggest fear or misconception about grad studies? And you mentioned, BF2, that you didn't think about grad studies at the beginning, right, of your, I guess, of your undergrad. So what would you say as sort of one of the biggest misconceptions about grad studies that you entered, and you found out that, it wasn't maybe as I thought?
For me, it wasn't really on my radar because as a first generation, like post-secondary student, it was just like not something that like I just even, I wouldn't even say like, I just something that that I didn't even like think about, literally, like it wasn't on my radar at all. So I don't know that I had any, preconceived notions about it. I just didn't think about it. It was just not something that I thought about. I thought maybe I'd go to law school. And it wasn't until I did a research project. It was a year long, like in the program that I was in, it was a year long honors program, strictly dedicated. It was like a mini master's in itself. And it was through that and some other research work that I was doing that I really, just kind of started to realize that maybe, grad school was a real good option. That, and then some grooming from the people that I was working with. So I don't know that I can think of any misconceptions that I had going into it.
Oh, I think, Victor, you clicked on mute.
Somehow I was muted, but no misconceptions come to mind. I'm sorry. Yeah, I can't think of anything.
No, that's okay. No, thank you. And it's great to know that. I think, it depends on, like sort of, the environment that you are in. Grad study is not something that you think about, right? It's not something that, you've seen people going to do. It's not something that, you hear about. So, I guess in your case, so you're saying that it's sort of, with that opportunity that opened the door, and instead of you're thinking about maybe that's something that you want to pursue. So yeah, thank you for that. Okay, so we'll just get to the last question is to everyone. With the audience who are sort of thinking about pursuing graduate studies, what one piece of advice would you give to someone who is thinking about grad studies, or who knows who's going to do it and who has already applied and who is going to start grad studies? What piece of advice would you give? Can we start with Arma?
Yeah, sure. So I think one piece of advice that even before I went into grad school, I sort of heard from a lot of professors, and through my research experience in the summer as my undergraduate, where they were like sort of, a lot of people usually go for like the project that excites them. But I think also thinking about sort of the professor that you get to know, sort of know your professor well enough to know that both of your sort of work ethics and your communication all pairs well. That's very important to have like a good relationship with your professor, because essentially you will be working with him or her through the entire your entire work area studies, sort of like 2 years, the 4 years you'll be doing your grad studies. So having like a good supervisor is a good way to sort of ensure your success. But other than that, I'd say also make sure to know how to manage your time well, and sort of your independent study behaviors, basically. Yeah, that's all I have. I haven't had much experience with grad studies, so that's all I can give for now.
No, thank you. And I think it's a great piece of advice. And in being so choosing a supervisor, we didn't talk all that much today, and it also depends on also again the discipline. So students in engineering, like Arma, tend to have a supervisor confirmed before they start their program or when they start their program. So you're sort of stuck with that person, right? So yeah, it is very, very important that you choose a supervisor that you want to work with, who can mentor you, can guide you. So thanks for actually mentioning that. It's really great. Biftu, would you be able to share a piece of advice with the prospective students?
Yeah, I think the first thing that came to mind for me was the term like resourcefulness. Like there are so many resources. So if I'd say if there's like a skill that I tried to, I don't know that I did this deliberately, but maybe just like reflecting back on my experience is like just being extremely like resourceful. Like there's a lot of resources that exist, I think, in pretty much everything that you can think about, whether it's in a lot of this has even come up in the conversation here for mental health. There's resources on campus for that, right? Reach out to your peers, your program, right? Like you're literally, it's just to reinforce the notion that you're not in it alone. And I think with that too, like a lot of times, as Benjamin mentioned, like the imposter syndrome, right, is quite a real thing. But like for some of us who like historically were not really imagined or even seen in these spaces, like we belong here, so don't forget that. And so in combination with that notion and the fact that there's resources and spaces that are emerging, that are led by people who have been historically excluded from these spaces, like we're meant to be here. So just really be grounded in that belief and resiliency, and good luck.
Great, thank you. So yeah, being resourceful, seeking resources, that's your advice. That's great, great again, thank you. Ben, your final piece of advice to the audience?
I think maybe just to touch on that, if you decide to do, or even if you want to know more about grad studies, or even if you decide to do it and you need help, like throughout, like this is probably more of a life lesson, but like I'm really bad at asking for help, and I've learned in the last couple of years, you'd be surprised at the amount of people that want to help you. Whether it's just like writing reference letters or information on something, or mental health, like anything. You'll be surprised, especially because the academic communities tend to be quite tight knit. So most of the time people understand where you're coming from. And I think like the second thing would be for people that actually decide to pursue, and more at the doctoral level than anything else, but as well as the master's level, is to instill a level of pragmatism in your project. And I only say that because a lot of grad students, especially younger, like when you first go into grad school, you come up with these like really interesting, crazy, wild projects to do, that probably have a lot of merit to them, but they're like impossible to do in terms of the time and money. Like there's a lot of constraints that you have to be mindful of. And I think a lot of people have learned that this year because of COVID-19. I've had to definitely readjust my own research, because like I'm not doing field research anymore, and I was originally going to, and I don't want to do another year or two when this is theoretically over in PhD life. I'd rather just push that project forward into a postdoc somewhere. So, and just to remind yourself, like your dissertation or your master's thesis doesn't have to be like a magnum opus. It needs to be original. It needs to be good, but like, you got your life ahead of you to write your magnum opus. So, and I didn't come up with that. Obviously, that's like a million other people have said that, but it's like the best piece of advice that was given to me personally.
No, that's great. No, thank you, Ben, for that. And so, yeah, being, of course, original, creative, but also be practical. I think that is really an important piece, especially in COVID. That is true. You have a whole, especially if you're planning to be a researcher, a whole career ahead of you to do the research that you want to do, right? So then, Ben, I think in your case, you make adjustment. Other students have had to make adjustments, but that would be really in the mindset of being practical and to be able to achieve really the main important goal, which is to complete your degree with the studies that you wanted to do. So that's great advice as well. Thank you. So now it's time to end this session. So I want to again thank you very much to all of you on the panel today to share your experiences, to sort of provide advice to the prospective students. Really thank you for your time and perspectives. That I also want to, of course, thank the audience for being engaged and putting questions. And I hope that you had a chance to get a better sense of what a grad studies, grad student life might be coming ahead. So I hope you were able to sort of now learn what you wanted to today. I just wanted to mention that the recording of the session will be made available on the FGS platform in the coming days for those of you who are interested in reviewing. We also know that some other people who wanted to be to join the session couldn't because of the time differences. We had students from all over, internationally as well. So the recording will be available for that purpose as well. So again, thanks so much, Arma, Ben, and wish you all the best with the rest of your studies. And then for those of you in the audience, so we hope we'll welcome you to York in the future. So thanks again, everyone, and have a good evening.